Okay, so we're going to do a quick presentation of a scientific experiment. We're going to measure the volume of specific gases that Carl is breathing in and breathing out, and we're going to come up with some conclusions from that. So I'd like to introduce Martin Cebis from Metabolic Health Solutions. Martin, this is a company in... Martin will come up to present the data at the end of this presentation, but essentially he comes from works for a company in Perth that makes a box called an ECAL, and the ECAL is it's a calorimeter, isn't it? Indirect calorimeter that is able to measure the volume of gases going in and out. They put a clip over your nose and they measure the oxygen that you breathe in, and the oxygen you breathe out and the CO2 you breathe out, and those three measurements, they're able to tell you some interesting things. But we'll get back to that in a little bit longer. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of instrumentation.
I'm going to start, right?
While these guys go and do this experiment. So, as you probably know, and expect Carl to do a lot of miming, he may not talk. So I think I might buy one of these gadgets for the next podcast. Maybe I can get a word in edgeways. So I'd like to talk about software development. This is something that Carl and I both do. And I want to talk about something called watch windows. So let's say you've got an application, and I've got an application here that Carl wrote for me. And you can see that it says press the OK button, and there's the OK button. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and press that button. Oh, it's running away from me. Hold on, I'll get it from the top. It won't. Oh, no, it's going down. Okay, I'll try and get it from the bottom. Every time I try to press on this button, it's running away. It's running away from me. Okay, so what's happening here? So what a developer will do when they have an application that's behaving poorly is they'll put a watch window where they can watch, for example, the X and Y coordinates of the mouse and watch the X and Y coordinates of the button, and you can see that as the mouse comes into the button area, the button is moving along. So this is the importance of being able to look an X-ray into an application or a process or a system to work out what's happening underneath, and that tells you something about the external behaviour. Now, it's also important in medical diagnostics to be able to know what's happening in the process. For example, personal glucose and ketone meters is something that a lot of us use all the time, and that tells us what's happening in our metabolic process. For example, this freestyle meter will read ketones, or it'll read glucose from a finger prick test. And the important thing here is being able to know where our glucose is tells us something about our reaction to the food that we eat. So, for example, this chart that you've probably seen from the diet doctor shows you the different reactions to your blood glucose using one of these just commercial available tests to actually see what's happening underneath the surface. And this is very important for diabetics because this allows us to see, it closes the loop on the feedback. So it basically enables us to see, okay, let me go out and test a food. Oh, that food makes my sugar go high. Let me test a different food. That food makes my sugar go low. And at that point, you say, aha, these kinds of foods make my sugar go high. These kinds of foods make my sugar go low. And then you make an appointment to see Jessica Turton and say, can you please give me a diet that gives me these foods? And she will be more than happy to do that. Now, that's one kind of medical diagnostic. Another kind is a continuous glucose monitor. Now, I've got one of these here. On my arm, and I can wave my phone over it at any time, and that will tell me what my glucose is right now at this moment. And in fact, it reads the last 8 hours worth of glucose from it. So if I go here, I can see that my glucose is currently 5.4. And I can actually see that earlier on in the day, it's a bit difficult to see this, but early on in the day, my glucose was in the red zone. That was hypoglycemic. My glucose had gone below 4.8, which is the trigger that I set for being warned, and that would normally be a dangerous thing if I wasn't ketogenic, because as we all know, if you're making ketones, your brain is able to run perfectly happy on ketones. It'll run 80% on ketones and only need a very little amount of glucose. And so you can quite happily go through a hypoglycemic reaction without having hypoglycemic symptoms. Okay, so The other day, I did an oral glucose tolerance test. Those of you who follow me on Facebook know a little bit about this story, but I'm going to share a little bit more information with you. So a doctor I was working with asked me to do this glucose tolerance test with insulin. So I was doing the full craft test, but it was a 2-hour craft test, and he asked me to put this on so that he could see what my glucose spike really was, where I really spiked. And you can see I've eaten 75 mils of glucose. This Duron Share was talking about these glucose tolerance tests. What they're doing is they're trying to see what how your body reacts when it's moving forward, when it's actually processing glucose, when it's working with glucose, rather than just a fasted test when it's not working with anything. And you can see that my glucose for most of that day was blipping along around about 5, which it does most days. And then I had a little bit of a dip down. This was in the morning when I woke up, and I dipped down to about 3.6, but I didn't have any symptoms of hypoglycemia. And I haven't had any symptoms of hypoglycemia for almost 10 years. If you have hypoglycemic symptoms, if you've ever had them, you'll know it's no laughing matter. You feel like, you feel sweaty, you feel hungry, you feel like there's something really wrong with the universe, but you're not sure what it is. And you can't think about what it is, and you just might have a lie down. And that's a hypoglycemic event. Now, I don't have any... Normally, back when I first was diagnosed with diabetes, I used to carry glucose tablets around because I used to take drugs that used to lower my glucose, and I'd take a glucose tablet to raise my glucose up again if I had a hypoglycemic event. But ever since I've been ketogenic, I haven't had any problem because the ketones support my proper functioning when glucose goes low. Here's the problem. I didn't have any glucose in the house. I didn't have any honey in the house. I knew when it goes low, I need to do that, and I didn't know what to do. And this is the peak, the peak of my glucose, and I had reactive hypoglycemia. So I came back within 2 hours, I was back to a normal range. I'd come back to 5.3, but it kept going low, 4.3, 3.6, and now I'm in the red zone. And the interesting thing here is I was making no ketones, 0.0 ketones. Okay, so now I'm in danger, and the only thing I had in the house was some MCT oil. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll have 4 tablespoons of that. Now I wouldn't recommend this as a solution for anyone having a hypoglycemic event, but if you have no glucose in the house, it may be an option. But for me, what this did was it enabled me to make ketones almost as fast as eating glucose, absorbing glucose across my gut would be, because medium chain triglycerides are absorbed straight up the portal vein, straight to the liver. They go straight into the mitochondria of your liver cells because they don't have to wait for the long chain fatty acid transports to get in there. This is a really quick way of getting ketones when you really need it. And so you can basically see what happened, that little dip stopped almost immediately, and over the rest of the day, my brain slowly started... essentially, my brain's requirement for glucose dropped, and so my liver was able to slowly increase until it got to the point where it was making the amount I needed for the day. So here's a rough look at what my ketones are doing at the same time. That spike of glucose coming down coincides with the spike of insulin coming up to respond to it, and that also coincides with ketones dropping. And that was the critical thing. So it's very important to be able to have a look at a watch window on your own body for these kinds of things and to be able to work out what's happening underneath. So anyway, we're going to talk about this metabolic testing. It's really the respiratory quotient. And I'll talk a little bit about the theory of the respiratory quotient. It's really about how we turn fuel into energy. Energy for our body is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's a simple molecule that we use to be able to pump sodium out of our cells and potassium into our cells to locomote. It's the essential core energy unit in our body. We make that ATP out of fuel. The fuel is glucose, fatty acids, protein, alcohol, sugar alcohols, ketones, all of these things that we can turn into ATP. So, but it's kind of complicated. This is the metabolic roadmap, and it's a little bit complicated. Energy metabolism is somewhere in there. It's a big spinning circle-y thing that Dr. Scher spoke about before. But I'll simplify it to 3 kinds of fuel: glucose, fatty acids, and other stuff. Okay, let's forget about other stuffs, proteins, ketones. Let's concentrate just on glucose and fatty acids. So the general format is we take fuel, we breathe in oxygen, and we make energy out of ATP, as ATP. We breathe out carbon dioxide, and we breathe out H2O, water, vapor in our breath. So that's at its core. That's how we make energy. Different fuels have different ratios of CO2 to oxygen. So, for example, I'm going to bore you with a little bit of biochemistry here. A glucose molecule, C6H12O6. So we have one glucose molecule, 6 O2 molecules, produces 38 ATP molecules, and produces 6 CO2s and 6 H2Os. Fat, on the other hand, is the formula for one particular fat. This is actually palmitic acid. This is the most common fat. It's the one we make out of carbohydrates when we have too many carbohydrates. That's the fat that we make. It is C6H32O2 plus 23 oxygens, produces 129 ATPs, 16 CO2s, and 16 H2Os. And you can actually see that the ratio of O2 coming in, the oxygen that you breathe in to make energy, and the CO2 you breathe out to make energy, in the case of glucose, is 1 to 1. For every 6 molecules of oxygen are going in, 6 molecules of CO2 are coming out. Whereas the ratio for fat is like 0.696, or in this particular fatty acid, palmitic acid. That is 23 oxygens come in and 16 CO2s come out. And that's why if we measure what Carl is breathing in and out, we know what fuels his body is using. And so, actually, fascinating. It's not all fats. Each fat is going to be different. For example, stearic acid, which is in beef and milk, and the ratio for stearic acid is 0.692. The longer the fat, the lower the ratio is. But it's roughly 0.7. So it's roughly 7/10 of for every 10 oxygens going in, there are 7 CO2s coming out.
So you're only looking at oxygen in and CO2 out.
Actually, there's 3 things. You're also looking at oxygen coming out, because you breathe in oxygen and you use some of it, and then you breathe out the oxygen you don't use. So the amount of oxygen that you breathe out the amount that you breathe in minus the amount you breathe out is the amount you've actually used. So that's an extra measurement. We'll talk about that in a second. So measurement number 1, what fuel are we burning? O2 in versus CO2 out. How much of the fuel we're burning is glucose, and how much of the fuel we're burning is fat? So we're going to know from that test that Carl just did whether he's burning mostly glucose or mostly fat. Okay, the next measurement is how much energy are we using are we making from fuel right now? And we're going to know Carl's metabolic rate when he's sitting there right now based on how much oxygen he's using. How much oxygen you're using will tell us how much energy we're producing, and I think the RQ is used for that formula as well. So that's the oxygen coming in is going to tell us how much energy we're making. An interesting thing about this is that different people have different metabolic rates. You can have people that are exactly the same height and exactly the same weight have metabolic rates plus 29% or minus 28% around the range. So each individual person is going to have a different rate. Now, what do we normally do? We normally weigh somebody and we guess. Or we use a heart monitor on a wrist device, for example, and we guess. This is actually telling us precisely right now how much energy we're using. And I should mention that this actually is one of the reasons that calories in, calories out is a failed model, because calories out is quite a complex thing. Humans also, the amount of calories that are coming out from Carl right now will be different than the amount of calories that are coming out from me, because we're different people. And if we were identical twins, we could also have a different metabolic rate. Calories out is affected by calories in. The amount of calories that you're eating is going to affect the amount of energy that your body is burning at rest. The amount of exercise you're doing, the traffic is going to affect it. Whether somebody cuts you off in traffic is going to affect your metabolic rate. The weather, what the temperature's like, is going to affect the metabolic rate. Whether you've got infections, your fertility status, all of these things are going to affect your metabolic rate. And so this is why it really has to be a unique measurement for each individual. And so if we look at roughly at women and men, women generally use less energy than men. But the basal metabolic rate is the largest part of the energy that you're using. Most of us think, I'm going to run on a treadmill, and that means I'll use more energy for the day. the blue line there is how much energy you're running on the treadmill. The yellow line or the ochre line there is how much energy you use just eating. And the grey line is how much energy you use doing nothing. And you can see that the grey bit is the largest part of your daily energy expenditure. And we also know the variance. Now, there could be a 28 to the low and 29% to the high variance on the amount of basal energy. So it makes it very difficult to try and work out how many calories somebody needs to eat, because we have no idea how many calories that they're burning unless we measure it. And then the third measurement is how efficient is our engine at making energy out of fuel. And this is really oxygen. This is the number we were talking about before. How much oxygen I breathe in versus how much oxygen I breathe out tells me how much oxygen I'm using, and that tells me how efficient my mitochondria is. I'd like you to compare the pair. Martin and Carl have both had metabolic tests, and if they don't mind me mentioning their weights and heights, Martin is 94 kilograms and 188 centimetres tall, and Carl is 131 kilograms and 180 centimetres tall. So the question is, who do you think burns the most calories at rest, and who do you think is more mitochondrially efficient?
I should also disclose that we started low carb at the same time. Both have type 2 diabetes. I'm not sure your A1C.
It was 7.4 at its highest.
But now?
It's last time I checked, it was 5 point something, 5.3.
So I'm 5.5. So we're fairly similar in being low carb at the same time.
So let's have a show of hands. Who thinks? Let's say burns more calories at rest. Who thinks that Carl burns more calories at rest? Okay, and who thinks Martin burns more calories at rest? Interesting.
That's a few more for me, I think.
And who thinks that Martin is a better fat burner? And who thinks Carl is a better fat burner? Okay.
Most people think I'm a better fat burner.
Okay, so
and there's a lot that don't know, right? Yeah. How many don't know?
That's a good question. So how about a question? Who do you think is more efficient? Who do you think has more efficient mitochondria? Who thinks that Martin has more efficient mitochondria?
Kind of fitter might be the...
Fitter. Who thinks that Martin is fitter? Okay, and who thinks that Carl is fitter?
That's about 5%. And just about the same.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just don't know.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it turns out that Martin burns more calories at rest than Carl. And Carl is a better fat burner.
5%,
by a significant amount. Yep. And also, Carl is more mitochondrially efficient. Which you wouldn't know unless you were able to measure.
Bacon for the win. Not that you don't eat bacon.
I do eat bacon.
You do. You love bacon.
Martin burns more calories at rest.
Well, because he just does.
There's a variation, and it depends upon quite a few factors.
Yeah.
And what we also do is we have a clinic which uses this information back in person.
Do you have a higher heart rate?
When this test, there can be all those differences. When we did the test, we actually cheated a bit. The test I did just then we didn't use because Carl sitting in a chair here on a stage is a stressful thing. And
I was really stressed.
In fact, on that test, his calorie, that was the only thing that really changed, was his calories were a lot higher. So when we were both tested before, the results you saw there, it was very carefully done to be very similar. So we're both reclining, lying down, and we'd also fasted for the same period, which is important because if someone fasts for, say, 6 or 8 hours and hasn't eaten any carbohydrates, and they come in and get tested, and they're a poor fat burner, so they're still burning carbohydrates at that time, you know why they're not losing weight. They're not a good fat burner. And you can look at strategies then. Low carb diets are one great strategy to get people to be better fat burners. But it's more complicated than that because the figures show that I'm a 20% fat burner and Carl's running at 100.
Did you want to?
So, any other questions before we break for a cooking demo and some lunch?
What will Martin do differently now to become more of a fat burner?
Well, they're working on me. Though I'm a work in progress, and I've done. Carl hasn't done a lot of exercise, but I've done hardly any exercise in my journey. It's all just with diet, and they've identified that I need to do more exercise, but I'm not really a great exerciser. But I'm going to change that because I need to improve. The key thing they've identified is that my FeO2, my efficiency, is 17.7 compared to Carl's that's in the 15s. So he's much fitter, if you like, metabolically fit than I am. So you know his main disadvantage is the calories he burns a day are lower than me. So there are strategies that Carl could use to raise that, and that would help him to lose weight if that was his goal.
Can I just ask, so Richard, what did your thing show us?
14. My glucose test or my metabolic rate? 14.9.
The glucose test, what did it tell us?
It's told us the importance of being able to have a window on your metabolism, on being able to measure. What you don't measure, you can't manage.
So yours went up at a particular point and then went down.
Yeah.
And so what does it mean? You
Okay.
do it well? Or
Yeah. So, well, it actually. The result was that I went back to 5.3 within 2 hours. So that's a good result. So it means that if I was to go. Okay. So there's a couple of things here. I'm ketogenic and I didn't wash out my glucose sparing. And so what that means is that because I'm ketogenic, my body cells that are able to burn either fat or glucose burn fat and ignore glucose. And so my body behaves like it doesn't want glucose, only my cells that need glucose, and all of us that are ketogenic are like that.
If you're fat adapted.
If you're fat adapted. If you do one of these tests, you really have to eat 120 grams of carbs a day for 2 weeks, then do the test, and then it's like you're not fat adapted, and it's a like-for-like comparison with somebody who's not ketogenic. But
and to have a result as yours, would you have to have 4 years of keto eating behind you?
It probably 6 weeks. You have to be fat adapted. Yeah. But then Jeff Volek found that people were able, even 6 months down the road, were still getting minor improvements. So but 6 weeks is where most people are feeling great. Ketogenic dieting is working for them. So.
What happens with people who are not quite ketogenic, but they're fat adapted, low carb, which is probably the majority of my last couple of years? What happens metabolically?
Question is what happens metabolically if you're not quite ketogenic but you're low carb?
Yeah, if you're fat adapted, you don't have to be ketogenic. You don't have to be you don't have to have ketones in the blood to have made ketones. You just have to use all of the ones that you made. So not showing ketones in the blood doesn't mean you're not making them. It just means that you have none left over after you've used them.
But I would think, you may have to repeat this, Carl, but I would think that I would be less metabolically efficient than, say, Carl or Richard.
So he thinks he's a little bit less metabolically efficient than either of us because of that, perhaps. That's what he would think.
Potentially.
Whole milk.
Well, here's the thing. The only way you're going to know is indirect calorimetry.
Yeah.
That's how you know, because...
Or mum.
Yeah. There's... so we're going to give away... we're giving away a goodie bag for everybody who came to the conference, and they're going to be available at the end of the day. And they will have a brochure for MHS in it. They will have some low-carb products from some of our sponsors. And so I think we can bring Science Brekkie to a close, and thank you very much.